Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today we're going to be talking about addiction recovery from two main perspectives. The first is as an addict in long-term recovery, and then as a loved one of those addicted individuals. Obviously, from my perspective, for those of you who have listened, but if you're new here, I have a father who's an addict and has been for many, many years. And then today's guest has been the daughter of an addict, the mother of an addict, and went through addiction herself. So today we're going to talk a lot about the cause and effects, the family cycles, what to look out for, what we can do to be preventative in our own nature and for our children and those associated with us, as well as, talking about how we can leverage what we've been through to help others understand, along with just the journey of addiction itself and the loved one's addiction. So we're going to be tapping it from all angles today in terms of addiction recovery. And here to help us do that is Ms. Jennifer Chase, the said guest we mentioned earlier. Ms. Chase, so great to have you here. And could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on tonight. I'm excited to have this conversation and like you said, hit it kind of from all angles. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am a daughter of an alcoholic. He was a very functional alcoholic, a pretty successful businessman. I had a great life, what it looked like from the street corner, but behind the front door. He was very erratic. You never quite knew what you were going to get when he came home from work. And additionally, I have about four generations down my mom's side and four generations down my dad's side that all have suffered with addiction. And unfortunately, I was a statistic of that, which is one out of every four little girl and one out of every six little boy that lives with that a much addiction in their home is sexually abused. And I was sexually abused by my grandfather. So the dance of this disease of addiction was very, very, very prevalent in my childhood. And so when I became an adult and didn't have any other coping skills to deal with all of these really hard things that had happened to me in my life, I too chose substance. And in 2003, I had a benign brain tumor, but it caused some chronic pain. And I turned to opiates.
Mm.
And they were really the solution to every problem that I had ever encountered up until that moment. And then as this journey goes, I found out when my son was 17 years old that I was in fact his drug dealer.
Wow.
Uh, and
That's a
that's
plot twist.
that's there's the plot twist. And so I've had to learn how to navigate this thing as a mama, and as a you know as my son has his own struggles, and he and I do recovery very differently. But it's for sure
Right.
been a journey. And you spoke earlier about how do we help other people, and that's really where I am today. Is how do I use all of these occurrences that have happened in my life for good and try to help people untangle from this thing called addiction.
So I want to start with the big point there that caught everyone's attention was you were your son's dealer. So were you when your son's issue first developed, were you at that point sober yet, or were you still in your journey of addiction?
Yep, I was still in active addiction. I knew that he had kind of always, so he struggled with mental health, had quite a bit of anxiety and depression. And I knew around when he was 15 that he was smoking marijuana sometimes. We didn't promote it, but we really didn't. I mean, I was in active addiction at that time, and my husband was just surviving the chaos that I had created along the way. Um, but when he was a senior in high school, I found out that he had become addicted to opiates, my opiates, right? I literally was his drug dealer. So when I was passed out in my bed or not coherent or not paying attention or whatever, he would just come in and take what he needed. And so, and I wish I could say to you that was the moment and that was enough and that was the day that I quit using. But that would be a lie. I used for probably another 6 months or so. And I didn't want to stop using. I wanted to stop being his drug dealer. I loved my son more than anything in the world, right? And I wanted him to get well, but I didn't want that to mean that I stopped having my
Mm,
security blanket that was
right.
substance. So I thought that I could just learn how to use like a gentle lady. I could just have fewer drugs in the house. I could, hide them better. I could do a variety of things so that I could stop being his drug dealer. But in that journey is where I found recovery, and in that journey is where I found peace. So I went in originally into an inpatient facility trying to figure out how to save my son, but I realized while I was there that the only way to save my son was to save myself.
I like what you said because it is something I mentioned a couple episodes ago, which was a podcaster who I was on his show. He shared a clip on his social media about how looking back, he hates himself for the fact that his rock bottom had to be so far down. He goes, some people first DUI, that's it, they're done. Or the first, threat from a spouse, that's it, they're done. Or whatever it was. He said he had to go to, I can't remember. I don't want to, kill him of anything he didn't do, but I'm pretty sure he said he had to go to jail. He had to get this many DUIs. He had to do all this stuff to reach rock bottom. And like you said, for you as a mother, that should
Yeah.
have been your rock bottom of now my habits have enabled my children to repeat this cycle that you didn't want to repeat from your parents and
Yeah.
previous generations. So, but like you said, when that addiction is there, it is so hard to see that rock bottom because you've got, skewed vision and perception with all this. So let's
When
kind of
I talk with families, that's what I do now professionally is help families that
right.
addicts navigate this thing. And one of the things that I explain to them, which is what you're kind of talking about, which as a family member, my pain tolerance to my addicted loved one is pretty low. It's like a 2, right? At a 2, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. You've got to get sober. But as an addict, because I'm using substance to numb, because I don't want to deal with my shame, because it's going to be really hard to get sober, that addict's pain tolerance is
Mm,
significantly higher,
yeah.
right? Like at an 8 or a 9, sometimes a 10. And what happens with family is because mine is a 2, I start rescuing and enabling at like a 1.5 or a 1.35 because I can't imagine getting to my pain tolerance. But what needs to happen to help your loved one get sober is you got to let them reach the 10, right? You got to let them reach the 9 that is their pain tolerance in order to get sober. And that's the part that's so incredibly hard as a family member. And I had to do it, right? Like I got sober. My son used for 3 more years after I got sober.
Mm.
So I watched that process and I was on my knees a lot praying about what this looked like and how do I help because I had done enough damage and so I wanted to contribute in a positive way that was going to lead him to sobriety rather than continue to negatively affect it.
So are you still with your husband?
Isn't that wild? Yes.
Right, because I was just thinking he had an addicted wife and son, so
Yes.
he's got the
Yeah.
war on two fronts, so to speak. And that yeah, so I was curious about that. And then of course, you know, you talked about your addicted parents. Now, do they know about your son, and how did that make them feel? Not just their grandkid and their daughter. I
Yeah.
mean, how did this affect them if they know about it?
Yeah. So my dad passed away in 2015 from alcoholism. By the way, for any of your listeners, that is a awful, miserable way to die.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, he didn't see me get sober, and he didn't know that my son was going to go on this journey himself. But my mom has. My mom has watched, and I think it's been a reflective journey for her. I think she has regrets, things that she wishes she could go back, obviously, and do differently in my life, and that would affect my son's life. But for the most part, they're just really supportive now. I have a really supportive family, which is pretty wild because they were part of the reason not they didn't do anything to make me be an addict, but the inadequacies that I felt within those relationships was part of the reason why I chose substance, right? Me feeling like I wasn't lovable and I wasn't enough, and all of the things that had come from my childhood, both relationships with my siblings and my mom, and my dad and my grandfather, right? Those relationships were all sort of proof to me that I wasn't very lovable. So when I got sober, it was just reinventing all of those relationships. But I want to speak about my husband really quickly because um, this is why I am so darn passionate about the work that I do now. I will never forget. He and I were driving down the road. I had been sober for maybe 4 months. If I'm being honest, treatment was the time of my life. I started connecting with other people that understood my shame. I was healing. I was not addicted to substance anymore. I had, physically withdrawn. And I was telling him about an experience that I had in group. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, I'm really happy that that's happening for you. I just sit here and suffer like I have for the last 15 years, and I have nobody." And that was like a moment for me where I was like, how do we start helping all of the family heal from this? And the truth is, my husband had a part in it. My husband was the rescue and enabler, right? He was not to blame and did not contribute to my addiction, but he contributed to the longevity of it because he was that person in my life that made sure that I had everything I needed, that my consequences were as minimal as possible, that the kids were taken care of. And certainly, hear me, he's not to blame for it, but it's why it lasted for as long as it did. And I realized in that moment, I was like, oh, if we want to treat the addict, and then the family, the entire family unit, we've got to help the mamas and the dads and the sisters and the aunts and the uncles too.
Yeah, it's funny. The episode before this was actually the story of a loved one of an addict. And we
Mm.
spoke about support groups. We spoke about the nature of how it's isolating.
Oh,
Yeah, you seek people because in her case and yeah, no, in my mom's case originally, both her and my mom had been told prior, like, hey, this person you're marrying, we believe that they're an alcoholic or an addict, and they said no, no, and then they found out, right? So they had shame around not wanting the "I told you so," and they didn't want to hear the "leave him," right? They didn't want
wow.
solutions, they wanted
Yeah.
empathy and sympathy and communication and active listening. And so I talked about how like we need third parties that are neutral, like kind of like AA for the loved ones, or like
Yes.
I'm sure there's some online groups, but we need more of those in-person communities or people that you can reach out to because even your friends and coworkers are going to be biased and there's still that shame around it. Because again, not everyone is okay saying, as you and I are, hey, I know for a fact my sister is truly embarrassed. And she said, if I ever, write a book or have a show where I talk about how my father's addicted and some of the things he did, she would be so upset about it. I don't take shame in it. I didn't make him an addict. It doesn't affect my character, right?
Right.
Um, in the same way you know, I'm sure at some point, and maybe it's different because you were addicted, but I'm sure for some parents, the idea of saying my kid's an addict, a lot of society will say, well, you failed as a parent. So they don't
Yeah.
never want to admit that.
There's
So
so
can you talk
much
about that?
shame. Yeah, there's so much shame. So it's interesting because I do have these different perspectives. And so I understand the shame of the addict, right? I understand the darkness and the things that the real problem, the real reason why I chose substance to begin with. But I also understand from a mama's perspective. And this being a loved one of an addict is almost across the board similar to being an addict yourself, right? So a lot of times the idea of codependency and rescuing is a compulsive behavior, just like substance is a compulsive behavior, right? Like I'm dealing with my hard feelings and my emotions through enabling and rescuing somebody, whereas before I did it with substance. It's very similar,
Mm,
but I think what is the most similar is the isolation. It's the darkness. It's you're sitting across the table from somebody that you've known for 30 years, and all of a sudden you have nothing in common because your life is falling apart in your
right.
house and you don't feel like you can talk about it. So that's one of the things that I have felt so compelled to do is start creating this community for like-minded people that understand addiction, understand the shame. That shame is different than the shame I have as a recovering addict, but it's shame nonetheless. And the way that we heal as a family is to start looking at our individual shame and our individual responsibilities in making this family dance, if you will, in a dynamic that works for everybody. Because this is the thing, your addict has to feel like they can come to the dinner table authentic, right? They have to be able to be who they are, 100%. And sometimes, as parents, who our children really are involves some processing for us, right? If they have different core beliefs or core values than we have, then we've got to work through that. And part of what you said earlier, which is like, I was a bad parent or I didn't do that right, we got to do that work before everybody can come back together and heal.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I want to focus a little bit on the healing, something you mentioned, which I mentioned earlier, which was every addict, there are some overlaps in behavior and
Yeah.
patterns, right? But at the same time, it's completely different for everyone, their
Yeah.
addiction journey, as well as you mentioned, your sons and your healing journey, your
Yeah.
recovery are different. So, what is that looking like for you and for him? And how does that make, communication in y'all's relationship, for anyone who is dealing with a addicted loved one or who is recovering, like obviously we need to be on the same page with them as what they need for recovery and how to respect that.
Yeah, I think it's really important. There are 9 million ways one can recover, right? I am the girl that says if you do it through AA, fantastic. If you do it through Smart Recovery, if you don't go to meetings, if you do it through MAT, like I'm the one that says, like, however it works for you, as long as you are finding new coping skills that don't involve substance and you're learning the reason why you use substance to begin with, right? Those are the two caveats that in my opinion, have to be part of one's journey. Um, I got, I was raised, if you will, in AA. So that's where my friends were all alcoholics when we got sober together, and we just all went to AA together. So, I've worked the steps and I've done meetings, and that's how I got sober. Now I've been sober for just a couple weeks, over 8 years, and that shifted a little bit. This season of my life is more spirituality and journaling and meditation and some of that area. And I do think it's important to recognize that long-term recovery can have different seasons. This isn't going to be
Mm,
popular for some people, right? Some people believe that it needs to be one certain way. And if that works
right.
for them, I love that. But for me, there have been seasons, and I have watched other people have seasons as well. My son does it completely differently. Like, doesn't go to meetings, did counseling for a while, but hasn't been doing it lately. And it's working for him. So you ask about the communication. For me, I try to remember that my son's life is his life, which means
Mm,
if it doesn't work for him and he doesn't change perspective and do something else, and let's say he relapses, or it's still his life, I'm not responsible for it and I don't have to take on the consequences of it, right? My full perspective with my son is to have trust and rapport with him. He is a grown man. And so I don't want that power differential any longer. I don't want to have to be the mom that tells him how to do things. I just want to be somebody that loves and adores him and walks alongside of him rather than tells him what to do and tells him what not to do. And, you're going to regret this. And, right, it's his life to get to live. And I think if we look at that and have that mindset more often, we also then don't feel responsible to pick up the pieces when somebody falls. Not that it's not hard, not that if he relapsed I would not be devastated, right? Not that all of those things, but it is his life to figure out. And so the communication is really just about sometimes we don't communicate the same, so there's some miscommunication. We used to have big blowups, and now they're very reasonable conversations about how we
right.
feel on both ends. Um, but it's tricky just because you have a lot of us that are addicts are very highly emotional human beings. We
Yeah.
feel very, very deeply. We have big, big feelings. So it's important for us to sometimes take a step back, take a pause, and then come back together and try to communicate differently. But I let him do it. I let him live his life. I let him have the consequences of his life. I let him have the celebrations of his life, right? I didn't contribute to the consequences, and I also am not contributing to the celebrations necessarily, other than just being his mom. And we are really close, but he gets to do this thing.
Yeah, and then let's kind of talk about, you mentioned relapsing, right? What is your journey right now with temptation, with cravings at all, if any, and accountability with your husband, with your son, and other people in your life as well as yourself?
That's a great question. I currently, right this moment, do not necessarily struggle with cravings or temptations. Um, I do remember though, probably 3 or 4 years ago. So I had been sober a while, like 4 years or so, and I was driving, and all of a sudden I would just a wave of I could feel like it was like to be high, and it like literally took my breath away. And this is the thing. So, if substance is not the problem and substance is the solution to the problem, then when I get sober, I've got to find new coping skills to deal with life because up until that point, the only coping skill that I had was substance, right? When life was good, I got high. When life was bad, I got high. When it was
Mm,
all the things, it was the only
right.
coping skill I ever had. So, if anybody is going to stay sober long term, they have to put in place coping skills outside of substance. So, we were talking earlier about the way people get sober. How I don't think people get sober is just eliminating substance and thinking it's going to be okay, right? That's suggesting that substance is the problem and substance isn't the problem. So now when I have triggers or waves of cravings or experiences like that, I've got new coping skills, right? I got journaling, I have meditation, I have exercise, I have all of these other skills that I have implemented into place. And then I have sort of safety nets, if you will, which is lots of conversations about with my husband about what we can do in our home and what we cannot do in our home. And that could be 1 year in, 8 years in, or 15 years in. I don't want opiates in my house. Not ever, right? I don't ever want to even test the waters that
Right.
I can do that on my own willpower. We have rules about like if I were to be in a car accident, what does that look like, right? All of these things that we've set
Mm,
into motion so that we can prepare for any worst case scenario. But really, what matters is my spiritual strength every single day and my which is meditation and exercise, those sorts of things that keep me away from those trigger experiences.
right. And like I've talked about before on the show, that and as you mentioned, the communication between you and your
Yeah.
partner, or whoever is helping keep you accountable or is in your life, making sure y'all are on the same pages, especially about the what triggers you to drink, right? Or what are those issues that cause you to drink in the first place. In the last episode, I discussed how for my father, there's certain places like the water park, the movie theater,
Yeah.
very large crowds, right? Those make him want to drink more than other places. Or there's certain places that have a lot of childhood memories that if he gets nostalgic and recalls his mother's passing, it's difficult for him. There's
Yep.
certain times of the year that are more likely to get him to drink than others. So being
Yep.
aware of all of those is definitely important, not just as the recovering, addict, but all the people around you who should be aware of those who spend time with you and help take care of you and hold you accountable.
Well, and
So,
I think it's very important when we're talking about healing as a family. Um, let's just pretend you're an alcoholic and you go to treatment and you come home and your spouse is mad at you and has resentments and is going to be spiteful and drink around you every day and there's going to be alcohol around you all the day,
mm,
right? Probably a smaller chance of success in that situation. And so,
right.
as we heal as an entire family, I think it's important to check in with the addict and say, like, what do you need here? Like, as an alcoholic, sometimes people are okay being around people that are drinking alcohol once they have some time under their belt, right? Is that the case? Or are you a person that's like, I just can't. I can't trust myself in those situations. So as the addict, then I have a couple of choices. Either my family is supportive and they kind of take my lead, or they don't, and I have to back myself out of those relationships until
Right.
I'm in a different place.
I think that's very important. I know some people who, like you said, cannot be around it at all. I remember my dad shared a story about he knew a guy who had been sober for almost 50, 60 years,
Yeah.
but he said if you put a line of coke in front of me right now, I will do
Yeah.
it. You
Yep.
know, even after 50 plus
Yep.
years. Um, my neighbor, like that I take care of, I won't even let him have ice cream that's flavored like alcohol or made with
Yeah.
alcohol on it because he might just need the flavor of it to start
Yep.
remembering, like, oh boy. Um, but at the same time, if I drink in front of him or if others drink in front of him, he can handle that. But there's been certain events that are going to have more alcohol or different types of alcohol, and he said that's too much.
Yep.
So I think understanding and learning your limits is important, but also, you talked about as the loved ones or asking the addicts, like, what do you need to stay sober? What do you need help? I think additionally, as the person in recovery, you need to, because there's a lot of damage done during your addiction. What do I need to do to keep everyone feeling safe, to make sure everyone doesn't feel like I'm going to relapse at any moment? What can I do to make amends? I believe one of the 12 steps of AA is to make amends as
It
long as
is.
it doesn't hurt the other people.
Yep. Yep. But we
So
try to wiggle out of making an amends because we're like, oh, I think that will hurt somebody. And our sponsor's like, no,
right.
you're making that up. You need to go do that.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah, and I think this is important. I tell this story when I do speaking. When I first got sober, about the first 6 to 9 months, my family really were walking on eggshells, right? They were real mad at me. They had a lot of resentments. When I got sober, my kids were 18 and 21, and they had lived since 2 and 5, right? So they had grown up in this addiction, and my husband certainly was mad at me. But they
right.
kind of walked on eggshells because they didn't want me to relapse. They didn't
Mm,
like me, but they didn't want me to relapse, right? So
mm,
after that 6 to 9 month period of time, it kind of became like game on for resentments. Like they
right.
started to
They
think,
were all
oh,
built up.
she's going to stay sober, and so they just start. It just the gates really just opened, and the
Mm,
resentments came. And I share this with addicts every single opportunity that I have. I caused the damage, and I'm going to talk particularly about my children right now. But I caused the damage for them, right? And for years and years and years, my words would say one thing and my behavior was something else. And so when I got sober, it became very, very important to me that I understood that my children finally deserved me to do hard, even if I mean, and hard it was, right? When your kids tell you how much they hate you, and when your kids tell you that they prefer you a drug addict because their resentments are all coming out. And what I wanted to do was just go get high. But it was the first time in my life that I realized, no, they deserve me to stick right here. They deserve me to do hard. I did some things that got us to this point. So, that 9 months that happened for about, I don't know, another 6 months. It was ugly, it was hard,
yeah.
I cried a lot, right? I thank God I had a tribe of people that I recovered with that kind of understood what I was walking through. And then it got to about 18 months, and in this time, so after the 9 month period of time, I had worked the steps and I had given them an amends, and I had said to each of them, what do I need to do to make this right? And each member of my family told me, we just need you to stay sober. And I'm like, got it. I hear you, right? So as the year goes on, we're getting to about 18 months or so, and the resentments are still happening. And I got to a point where I was like, okay, we're done now, right? Like, you have a responsibility to go do the work. I can't fix the resentments for you. Like, I feel like I've done everything you've asked me to do. I've stayed sober. I'm doing the work. I'm trying to help people. I get up every day and make my bed because somebody told me I should. And so that was kind of another pivot where it's like, okay, now we all have to heal. Now my children were responsible to go to counseling and heal from the trauma that was me as their mom. And I couldn't do it for them, but I also wasn't going to spend the rest of my life being a victim to it because I was doing everything that I possibly could to change my behavior. And so it was a really tricky 18 months or so. I had the opportunity with both of my kids to sit in counseling offices with them. They read me letters. They told me things that were really, really, really hard for me to hear. And we committed. We never quit on each other. We committed on doing this work. And it's been a beautiful experience because not only have I healed, but everybody has healed. Like we are all completely different versions of ourselves than we were 8 years ago. And so if somebody asks me what am I most proud about in my life, I'm most proud of every single member of my family that we have taken this as an opportunity to grow and learn and heal. Um, but but interestingly enough, I could only do so much for them, right? I could really only do what I said I was going to do, which was going to stay sober. And the trauma that I had caused and the pain that I had caused along the way, I couldn't fix for them. They had to go
Right.
seek it themselves and do that work for themselves.
Right. And in some situations, there's nothing you can do. Like what's done is done. And it's like that kind of forgive but never forget one of those situations where, it's like, well, how are we going to move forward if you have this laundry list of everything I did from the past? So I get it though. I get it from the perspective of someone who, is the son of an addict.
Yeah,
And I know a lot of people have kind of said that the only reason, like, if and this is true, they said to me, Mr. Whiskey, if that man wasn't your father, you wouldn't be so forgiving of everything that he's done. You wouldn't be so forgetting. Um, but I know that in order to help my father now on his journey of sobriety and to have a relationship with him, I can't just constantly be bringing everything up because he's still in a place where that is just going to push him to drink, and he's not in a state where he's going to be like, well, if I go and drink, I'm just going to prove them right. In his point of view, who cares? He's in a point
yeah,
where he doesn't care. So I think it's important. And I think there will be a time and place. And maybe never even to him, like you said, some of this stuff, the addict can't change. It's stuff you got to take elsewhere, or to the grave. But, you got to there's only so much that y'all can do. But like you said, I think it's healthy to express it, not to bottle it up. So maybe that's through letters, maybe it's through counseling, maybe it's
yeah.
through a support group. But if you're
And let
gonna, talk to the addict themselves, making sure that they're in the right headspace to do that. Like you
yeah,
said, for some people, 6 or 9 or 18 months afterward might be too soon.
yeah,
Some people
yeah.
need a lot more healing than others. So I
Well,
want
I
to
think
pivot.
this is really important too from the addict's perspective. When it's like, no, I can't go back and change any of it, right? I can't change my children's experiences and the trauma that they incurred. But what I can do is that I can live in a manner today which is like a living amends to my children,
Right.
right? And that's my whole goal in my life. I get up every day and today I'm going to have a living amends for my husband and my two children. And how do I do that? I help other people. I say what I mean what I say, but I don't say it mean, which means I'm honest with
Mm.
them. I'm vulnerable with them. I tell them the truth, even if it's hard, right? I do what I need to do for my recovery. That's a living amends to my children because the moment I'm like, well, I don't really want to journal today, or I don't really want to make my bed, although that sounds silly to some, but some
Right.
that's the mindset of like, oh, I'm not. And so that is what I can do. And that I think has been really healing for my children because they have learned to be able to trust me again. Like I can honestly say we're 8 years in. I think my children would trust me with their lives again, which would not have been the case 8 years ago,
Right.
right? Um, and so we are powerless over a lot, but we have a lot of power over a lot also, just based on the way we choose to live our lives moving forward.
Right. And you mentioned there as well several times throughout the episode helping others nowadays. So I want to pivot into Rise Addiction Life Coaching and what you're doing nowadays with everything you've been through.
I would love to share. So I spent about 6 years after getting sober working for a company on the executive team that was outpatient treatment for the addict. And
Mm.
as I continued to do this work, I just felt this tug that I needed to help reunite these families that struggle with addiction. And because I have so many different perspectives, I call myself sometimes your neighborhood addict, which is I help people sort of get into the mind of this disease a little bit when it's not something that they suffer with themselves. Um, I believe very strongly that when you're trying to help navigate or contribute to an addict's sobriety, right? If you're trying to to get them into a direction of getting sober, you have to allow them the full weight of their consequences of their life. You have to let them get to that pain tolerance that we talked to earlier. And for so many of us, including myself, when this journey started with my son, like I just didn't want him to kill himself. I just wanted him to graduate from high school because I didn't want the implications of not having a high school degree. I just wanted him to finish football. All of the I just that I
Right.
rescued and enabled him and fixed all of his consequences for him. And so he never really suffered any consequences. It wasn't really that hard for him. It was only after we kind of stopped and started to allow him the full consequences and the full weight of his disease that he started to get motivated to change. Now, you can do that and love somebody with your whole heart and spirit, right? You can do that and continue to build true trust and rapport with somebody while they are in active addiction. You can find your own peace and contribute in a positive way to guiding your loved one down the trail of sobriety. So this is what lights my heart on fire. I love to connect other individuals that are like-minded, that have felt alone, that have felt isolated, and have them sit in a room with somebody else that understands this journey. I recently had somebody that I worked with whose daughter relapsed after 2 years, and the first thing she did was to reach out to her people, right? These people, that this community that we've created, before she even called her husband when she found out, because she just needed that connection and that community. So I believe wholeheartedly that we can change the dynamic of addiction. We've got to change the stigma of addiction. And in changing the stigma of addiction, we change it for the addict, but we also change it for the family of the addict.
Right. Right. And I think that what you've kind of mentioned, I've talked about before on the show, just in a different wording, which is I say, you talk about loving them and still letting them face the consequences. I talk about loving with boundaries, with
Yeah,
respect, but especially with those boundaries, because I used to be that enable and save, kind of guy with my father. And eventually there came a point where he was endangering my life, where the consequences were
yeah,
seeping into my life and the
yep,
people I cared about. And I didn't care about my life. But when it affected the people in my life, that was when I was like, no, you need to contain this to your life. And I'm going to love you with boundaries. And that actually allowed him to realize, like I talked about in the last episode, it was unfortunate, but my father was so intoxicated for Thanksgiving, I had to leave him, and that meant and it was very painful for me to do to abandon him. Quote, this idea of you're abandoning your father on Thanksgiving. You're driving away and he's running down the street, chasing after you. That was really, really hard to do. But he then sobered up for
yeah,
Christmas because he just realized, like, because I've always been that, like, everyone else has left, right? But I've always stayed no matter what. And that became well, I can keep doing whatever because at least Mr. Whiskey will always be there to have my back or do this. And we're not saying, it's hard, right? Because you don't want to see the people you love and care about end up in jail, or suffering financially. I mean, definitely intervene if someone's life is in danger, right? Definitely don't let them drive, right? But
right.
if it's that those financial consequences, those social consequences, those things that they're going to be like, wow, I really am losing people in my life, or I really am like not going to be able to keep living this way. I think that is important. Some might call it tough love, but it's necessary love, like you said, and it shows that, like I said, setting those boundaries. Because I love Dr. Brian LeQuinen came on the show. He said a lot of us are he uses the term held emotionally hostage by our
Mhm.
addicted loved ones, and I love that phrasing,
Well,
being
and I
held
think
emotionally hostage.
what you're talking about too, is allowing them to get to their pain tolerance, right?
Yeah,
So if your pain tolerance is a 2 and you've always fixed it for him because it hurts too much to watch him run after you or for him to suffer financially or socially, so he never even gets close to 10,
yeah,
right? And so what you're talking about, I don't even consider it tough love. Tough love to me is when you are putting on consequences to somebody, right? For
mm,
me, just allowing them the full weight of their own consequences and getting out of their way and allowing them to get closer to that pain tolerance, because that pain tolerance is where they're going to choose to change. So when you're talking about, you were the one that was always there and now you're not, that increased your dad's pain tolerance, right? That
right,
was like, oh, what are we doing? Like, this is more painful than normal. And I think as a loved one, that's so important because we've been told in our brains that we don't abandon our family, especially not our children, right? Like, what kind of parent am I if I allow my child to be
right,
homeless, or in jail, or whatever the scenario that we tell ourselves? And this can be counterintuitive, but it's not adding on. It's not like I'm adding consequences to what you're doing. I'm simply not removing them anymore, right? I'm simply just
mm,
allowing you to get to your pain tolerance. Um, and you can do that. You're talking about boundaries. Like, boundaries are not punishment to somebody. Boundaries are protection of your own
yeah,
peace, right? I don't set a boundary to be spiteful or to punish somebody. And if I am, then they're the wrong boundary to set, right? Only set boundaries in and around, is this too, if is my peace at risk here? And if the answer is yes, then the cost is too high. And that's where the boundaries get set. And it's very, 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 very important to realize that, especially for somebody that's in the trenches of this thing. Boundaries are not punishment, they are simply to protect your peace.
right. And we're gonna have your website in the description below. Tell us kind of who you work with and who should reach out to you.
Yeah, so I work with all family members. So if you're a mom or a dad or an aunt or an uncle, grandparent, sister, brother, there isn't a family member that I won't work with. So if you have a loved one that is either still in the depths of addiction, or you're trying to navigate when they first get sober, because that can be a really, really important time and a really tricky time. Navigate how we're contributing to the solution and not contributing in a way that's going to actually lead them back to using substance. So, my website, I think you spoke of it, is www.riseaddictionlc.com. People can find me there. They can connect with me there, and reach out, and I will reach out as soon as I can. I'm also on TikTok at Jen Chase, and love to just connect with people there and do videos. So, again, we create a community. I think sometimes that's the most important part, which is finding people that are like-minded, that are walking through this, and just so that you have a tribe of people with you while you do the work.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like we said, community is so important because it can be very isolating for both the addict and the
Yeah.
loved one of that addicted individual. So appreciate the community you're trying to build. And like I encourage people, if you can't find what you're looking for, you can always help create on your own and connect with people who want to do that same thing. And I appreciate you just having this conversation as part of that community for where people can listen in and relate to you, relate to me. So I really appreciate you coming on the show to share all this today.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Sailing through the ocean blue, nuclear reactors my crew, guiding the ship, the stars as our guide, through the waves we ride, jokes and laughter fill the air. On this voyage we have to share, working together Side by side as one family we will abide. In the heart of the ship we reside, nuclear operators with pride, powering the vessel with every stride. Our mission, the source of great pride.